So my first years in seminary were in the 90s, late 90s. And I remember a lot of people, there was this big kind of push for, okay, so as a priest, you're not merely meant to be a sacramental minister. You're not a sacraments dispenser, they say, so like,
no
okay,
ATM,
that's fine.
not sacramental ATM.
Right. And they're like, but what are you instead? And so they're like, well, and they didn't have the word for it, or they weren't willing to use the words for it, at least where I went. They were talking about like, well, it's ministry of presence. It's really, being there, and like, okay, that's fine. I get ordained years later, maybe even like a decade into it. One of my brother priests now, it must be over a decade into it, because he's only 10 years ordained and I'm coming up on 21. And he just was talking about spiritual fatherhood. The heart of the father is the heart of the priesthood. I remember thinking, like, oh yeah, that's what it is. And no one had. I get it. I hadn't been formed of that mentality. I hadn't been formed in that mindset. And so, even like the idea of being called father right away at 28 or whatever, however old I was like, one of the reasons why I write my name all lowercase, all one word, Father Mike, is because when I was first ordained, people are like, hey Mike, how you doing? I'm like, it just pretend it's all one word, just Father Mike. So that's how I sound my name. It's just all lowercase, Father Mike. But that spiritual fatherhood, that especially being on campus, I just completed my 19th year on campus, as well as being the director of youth ministry. And, and it's been a great grace when, I'll share the story relatively often, but I remember walking into we have a little Newman house here, and one of the missionaries, she just looks up with the other students. She's like, "Oh, hi, Dad." And I was like, hi. I'm just going to walk upstairs quick and just, I was like, that, wow. Yeah.
That's true.
And it was one of those situations where I just thought, again, everyone calls you Father Mike, of course. But that is, I was like, oh, and it seemed to be not, in that moment where it was kind of like, because I've been thinking and praying about it, but not like saying it out loud, this spiritual fatherhood. And I don't really, but for someone to say, I recognize your fatherhood in my life, to the degree to which like, oh, hi Dad, kind of thing. And I'm like, oh, wow, that is, the most incredible title, if for lack of a better, or a compliment I could ever maybe have in my entire life, where someone who, of course, they have to call me father because that's the role, that's the title, that's the whatever. But, and so, but I don't want to make too big of a deal about it. There was actually a thing I did an event I did like 3 weeks ago. And some of our students were there, and there was a group of adults who had heard me share about how deep that has touched my heart. And they're like, "Go, hey, call him Dad. He likes it. Call him Dad." And I was like, just chill. I mean,
but I really hope that, that the dads who hear this, that they feel elevated by you saying that. You know what I mean? Because you're saying the title of father, for someone to call you Dad, is actually an honor. And I hope every dad who's just in there in the trenches, changing diapers, dealing with screaming kids, chasing, like that they know this is how you feel, if like, wow, that's an honor for somebody to be called Dad, and these guys are called Dad every day.
Well, that's the thing is like, recognize the depth, which, I mean, this happens at graduations a lot, is they'll have a student come over with their dad and say, "I want a picture with my two dads." And then I'm always like, I always feel like, okay, but that dad has like literally changed your diaper, and that dad is done all the, he paid for the school, so like I didn't do it. So I'm like, I know my place. Spiritual father.
No, but I mean, I have to tell you, as a parent of teenagers and young adults, for those men and women in our orbit who have come alongside my kids and have taught them things that I have said. I've literally had teenagers sit at our dinner table and say things. "Oh yes, this teacher told us blah, 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 blah." And I'm thinking in my mind, I've said that like 50 times. Yeah, exactly. But that teacher has an inroad into my child's heart that I love. And I mean, I'm jokingly frustrated, but I'm also so blessed. Yeah. So I know that that dad, believe me, that dad was like, yeah, I changed his diaper, but you had to deal with him as a young adult here in college. So
that's why
everybody has their place.
I also love meeting the parents now because we're about the same age, the parents and I. Which I'm like,
there you go.
Like, this is kind of fun. Like this is
that's cool.
As I said, I've been here for almost this upcoming fall will be the start of my 20th year. So that meant that when I got here, I think I remember turning 30 with our students and they had a big, made some cakes and stuff like this. And so I think my first year I was maybe 28, then 29, then 30. And I think like, oh my goodness, like I was only a couple of years older than them. And in my relationship was very different. And so I really, it's like, I keep going back to this. It's the spiritual fatherhood is significant. But as you noted, so one of the things I'm doing now is we have this little house. That's where I'm at right now. And our chapel is a 2-car garage that we just transformed into a little daily mass chapel. And we set up from Sunday mass on campus, and it's grown to the degree that we can't stay in this chapel, this house anymore. And so recently, I guess 2.5 years ago, we were able to buy the whole block that we're on, and we're trying to build a church and a Newman Center. And so one of the pains of, and this is actually something that goes back to my own dad, is that I've been assigned the charge of raising money to build a church and a Newman Center. And that means I've been traveling all over the country, just telling people our story and telling them about, would you like to get behind this project? Because there are hundreds and hundreds of students here. And they're part of the ministry, but we don't have any place for them. And so, and think of
you
how
many,
take
care of your kids.
Yeah. So this is the tough part. The tough part is I feel sometimes like an absentee father. I feel like my dad, right? So here's my dad who was like, okay, I have to go. And when I'm here, I want to be present. I want to be here for you. But also, that I'm leaving tomorrow and I have to go. And that was a conviction that that came upon, maybe 10 years ago, before we doing this fundraising, I was being invited more and more to go places and speak. And one of our students, and she's amazing. She actually even reminded me of this. I guess 4 weeks ago, she sent me a text, and she is now a wife and she's a mom. And at one point she said, "Hey, Father, do you think that you should still be on campus? Like, do you think you should still be here?" And I was like, "Oh, well, what do you mean?" And she said, "Well, do you think you still have time for us anymore?" And I remember just being like, right to the heart, like, okay. And so right from then on, that's when I cut down on traveling. I cut down on speaking. I cut down on virtually everything. Cause like, if my dad had a choice, he'd be home.
That's right.
I mean, of course we all make choices, and if we made choices to do whatever, but if you had the choice that I had right there, which is, this is an optional thing. This is, I get to be. And so I made the choice to like, okay, I'm going to say no to 199 out of 200 invitations. That's how it's going to be. And so that's what I tried to do. And now it's like, okay, but the bishop has told me to do this, and this is the opportunity. This is the chance we have. So I have to leave, but it still has that sense of like, I just wish I didn't have to go.
But the struggle is real, right? For you and for dads and for moms, right? And recognizing those decisions we have to make to both provide materially, temporally, as well as spiritually, emotionally for our kids, right? And they don't need our leftovers; they need our best self. And I love that, and I think it's a good conviction. I mean, I think you might know this, but it's like that the witness of priests and religious to us as parents, we see that level of commitment that you bring. And that inspires and encourages us. And I've heard from priests, that
goes both ways.
It's a symbiotic relationship.
It really
it's
is.
Kind of like God set this up or something.
Yeah. Crazy. There seems to be a designer at work here.
And we have a group of religious sisters in our state, in our diocese as well, called the Handmaids of the Heart of Jesus. And they're unique. They're based out of New Ulm, Minnesota. And originally they're in our Archdiocese St. Paul, Minneapolis, and they're back there now, but their home base is New Ulm. And we have them here, just like they're now a mile away, which is awesome. It's so Beautiful. Great. But one of their charisms is that they go into parishes, and they're like, okay, we're the religious sisters of the parish. And so there's something about that's so profoundly familial, right? So you have, I think that's one of the reasons why sometimes you have a lot of, well, at least at certain times in the history of the church more recently, where there's that tension between like, so what's a women's role in the church and men's role in the church, and why can't women be priests and kind of thing. And I think that all comes from, well, in most parishes, hopefully they have a priest. But what we really need is to have a spiritual father and some kind of a spiritual mother.
Absolutely.
And to have the handmaids more and more in parishes, as well as other religious sisters. I think it cuts through all of that, and you realize like, oh, okay, just like the two of you, like who's more important in your family? Well, yes, both. And, you know, that kind of situation of that, who's more important in the church? Well, men or women? Like, yes, we need all of us. And
it's
we
that complementarity.
Really is.
Yeah.
Spiritual motherhood,
we could talk about
fatherhood.
Complementarity like forever. I mean, absolutely.
I think that is one of the greatest crises in the church today. At first I thought it was just a lack of fathers and masculinity, but then I realized it actually is. It is true complementarity, right? You know, that this true femininity and this true masculinity that work and put their power, if you will, at the service of each other, you know, and that there is spiritually as well as in the natural family order.